although you said that you weren't about attacking all Muslims, you mentioned public opinion polls were describing the prevalence of radical Islam. So would you provide for me how you would interrogate your Muslim to decide whether they were the radical Islam that needed to be killed because they were involved in a war against the United States, and what were the questions and evidence that would be forthcoming that would show, no, they're innocent and you let them go?
For example, there was a mosque in Northern Virginia which had Anwar al-Awlaki, the American-born cleric who's now living in Yemen, who directly inspired the Fort Hood massacre, the man who perpetrated the Fort Hood massacre. From his mosque, both in San Diego and in Northern Virginia, he opened the call for jihad against the United States. He said that you were going to be given 72 virgins in heaven, Allah willing. There was always Allah willing. That's the end every sentence. And so this was a man who directly inspired the Fort Hood massacre. Now, call me a fascist. Okay, I think that mosque should be under surveillance. I think if you have an imam spouting jihad against the United States and calling for the mass murder of Americans, that should be under domestic surveillance. And if you see any activity where there is funding involved, training involved, communications involved to plot and perpetrate an attack upon the United States, then that person should be arrested. Now that's how you fight a war. You seal the southern border. That's another way you fight this war. In Afghanistan, you don't engage in nation building. You topple the Taliban. This is the other thing. Somehow we've become occupiers. We liberated 23 million Afghans, 27 million Iraqis from brutal fascist dictatorships. Ask the people of Afghanistan. I've never seen an empire like it. This is an empire. This is the strangest empire I've ever seen. They don't want us to leave. The Afghans don't want us to leave. The Iraqis don't want us to leave. So this is not Rome. This is not the Soviet Union. This is not Hitler's Germany. We have liberated 50 million people in the Middle East, given them a chance at a decent society, at a decent life, where women can go to school, where their fingers aren't cut off if they put nail polish. The most basic human rights we have secured, and all of a sudden, we are to blame? To me, it is obscene. It is morally obscene.
Sorry. Okay, that's fine. Okay, and now Jeff, you get to ask a question of Bruce.
Bruce, the argument that you make today is the same argument that Herbert Hoover, Robert Taft, many of the anti-interventionist conservatives of the 1930s made regarding Adolf Hitler. Now, as you know, during World War II, there were massive civil rights violations. Japanese Americans were interned. German Americans were interned. Italian Americans were interned. Do you believe that the World War II was a just war? Should we have fought Adolf Hitler? And if your argument is that war inexorably leads to a national security state that permanently violates our fundamental liberties, tell me, how come we were freer after World War II than we were before it?
Oh, remember, in World War II, we were attacked, and I certainly believe in responding to attacks by nations, and Adolf Hitler declared war on us. And my disagreement with you, Jeff, is that I think you've magnified the danger about 5 million times what it really is by associating radical Islam with the Luftwaffe, the Wehrmacht, the Japanese army with industrial bases. You know what they had? If you took the combined armed forces of the Nazis and the Japanese, about 17.5 million people in the armed forces. And they had V-1, V-2 rockets. They had scientists like Werner von Braun or otherwise. Those were existential threats to the United States of America. Compare that danger, say 17.2 million people in their armed forces, and we have people, our experts saying there are 50 to 100 al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and less than 300 in Pakistan. And remember, these people have no power to conscript, they have no power to tax, they don't have any access to big oil, industrial base, they have no scientists. I think you've in fact displayed the psychology of empire by creating a danger that's a legitimate law enforcement criminal danger, and I have no doubt that it's quite appropriate to arrest people who are plotting to commit crimes and murder against United States citizens. But you created a suggestion of danger that takes us to cross the threshold of war that's unjustified. Remember, the Constitution, at least indirectly, hints at what standard of threat justifies war in providing for suspending habeas corpus in times of rebellion or invasion. Rebellion or invasion, existential threats, you can suspend habeas corpus, that's war. And the U.S. Supreme Court has found correctly, no, 9/11 wasn't invasion, it wasn't rebellion, it wasn't war. You cannot suspend habeas corpus even if Congress wanted to do that. You have a right to have some federal judge decide whether you're in fact an enemy combatant or not. That's really the basic, I suppose, disagreement we have. I think that you have displayed this hyper worry and alarmist attitude towards radical Islam, which would get us into war at the drop of a hat. Remember, this was also said about communism. We were fighting in Vietnam because communism was going to be on our doorstep. We'd be fighting communism in Washington, D.C. if Saigon fell and we went out on helicopter skids. Well, it happened, but we didn't end up fighting in Washington, D.C.